on MadPod.com. Nightmare in Amityville. The Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family. A documentary recounting the infamous Long Island, New York slayings, which set the stage for the 1979 blockbuster, The Amityville Horror. The first no-holds-barred public interview with original Amityville homeowner George Lutz since 1969. The first ever interview with convicted murderer Ronald DeFeo's wife Tracy from Greenville, South Carolina. Nightmare in Amityville. The Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family. With Shadoe Steele. Coming soon to MadPod.com.
Hey, this is JADonnelly, MadPod.com, and in celebration of my birthday, 060606, we're going to run the Shadoe Steele Amityville Horror Special. Here is Part 1, MadPod.com.
Nightmare in Amityville, the Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family with Shadoe Steele. The guests: Tracy DeFeo, WNE WTV Channel 5 New York investigative reporter Laura Didio, Hans Holzer, internationally renowned psychic researchers the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine, and psychic sleuth Mary Downey. Special guest George Lutz. Nightmare in Amityville, the Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family with Shadoe Steele. Ronald DeFeo Sr. had attained a trophy-sized piece of the American dream when he purchased the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island. Having been born and raised in Brooklyn, Ronald had worked hard at his father-in-law's Buick dealership, and after many years began to reap rich benefits. Money was no longer a concern when he finally made the decision to leave the city and move to Long Island's South Shore. The home he chose was a classic piece of Americana. 2 stories plus an attic, and a boathouse on the Amityville River. There was plenty of room for him, his wife Louise, and 4 children. A signpost in the front yard read, "High Hopes," a testament to what the new home had symbolized for the DeFeos. But beneath the veneer of success and happiness, Ronald was a hot-tempered man, given to bouts of rage and violence. There were stormy fights between he and Louise, and he loomed before his children as a demanding authority figure. As the eldest child, Ronald Jr. bore the brunt of his father's temper and expectations. As a young boy, Ronald Jr., or Butch as he would come to be called, was overweight and sullen, the victim of schoolyard taunts and quite unpopular with other children. His father encouraged him to stick up for himself, but while his advice pertained to the treatment of schoolyard bullies, it apparently did not apply to how young Ronald was treated at home. Ronald Sr. had no tolerance for backtalk and disobedience, keeping his eldest son on a short leash and refusing to let him stand up for himself the way he was commanded to act at school. As Butch matured into adolescence, he gained in size and strength and was no longer a sitting duck for his father's abuse. Shouting matches often degenerated into boxing matches, as father and son came to blows with little provocation. While Ronald Sr. was not highly skilled in the art of interpersonal relations, he was astute enough to realize that his son's bouts of temper and violent behavior were highly irregular, even in relation to his own. He and his wife arranged for their son to visit a psychiatrist, but to no avail, as Butch simply employed a passive-aggressive stance with his therapist and rejected any notion that he himself needed help. In the absence of any other solution, the DeFeos employed a time-honored strategy for placating unruly children. They started buying Butch anything he wanted and giving him extra money. At the age of 14, his father presented him with a $14,000 speedboat to cruise the Amityville River. Whenever Butch wanted money, all he had to do was ask. And if he wasn't in the mood, he simply took it. By the age of 17, Butch was forced to leave the parochial school he was attending. By this time, he had begun using serious drugs such as heroin and LSD, and had also started dabbling in petty thievery schemes. His violent behavior was becoming increasingly psychotic as well, and was not confined to outbursts within his home. One afternoon, while out on a hunting trip with some friends, he pointed his loaded rifle at a member of the party, a young man he had known for years. He watched with a stony expression as the young man's face turned white. He fled, and Butch calmly lowered his gun. When they caught up with their friend later that afternoon, Butch asked him why he had left so soon. At the age of 18, Butch was given a job at his grandfather's Brooklyn Buick dealership. By his own account, it was a gravy job where little was expected of him. Regardless of whether or not he showed up for work, he received a cash allowance from his father at the end of each week. This he used for his car, which his parents had also purchased, for alcohol and for drugs such as speed and heroin. Altercations with his father were growing ever more frequent and correspondingly more violent. One evening, a fight broke out between Mr. and Mrs. DeFeo. In order to settle the matter, Butch grabbed a 12-gauge shotgun from his room, loaded a shell into the chamber, and charged downstairs to the scene of the altercation. Without hesitating or calling out to break up the fight, Butch pointed the barrel of the gun at his father's face, yelling, "Leave that woman alone. I'm going to kill you. You fat fuck. This is it." Butch pulled the trigger, but the gun mysteriously did not go off. Ronald Sr. froze in place and watched in grim amazement as his own son lowered the gun and simply walked out of the room with casual indifference to the fact that he had almost killed his father in cold blood. That fight was over, but Butch's actions foreshadowed the violence he would soon unleash not only upon his father, but his entire family.
Don't get mad. Get media. MadPod.
Nightmare in Amityville. The Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family with Shadoe Steele continues. In her first radio interview ever, from Westminster, South Carolina, Ronald's wife, Tracy DeFeo.
Joining us live from Westminster, South Carolina, Ronald DeFeo's wife, Tracy. Welcome, Tracy. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tracy, now, firstly, my best wishes to you and Ronald. You are a newlywed of sorts, wed in April. How did you begin your relationship with Ron? Now, I would think through the mail, but what sparked your interest in befriending Ronald DeFeo?
Well, I met my husband when I traveled to New York with one of my friends to meet her husband. And Ronald was in the visiting room with a friend, and we were introduced, and we started our correspondence afterwards.
Now, you obviously have a solid bond of trust in Ron, Tracy.
Yes, I trust my husband completely, and over the years he's been labeled a pathological liar. You know, he can't be trusted, but that's the furthest thing from the truth.
What did you know about the sensational Amityville slayings case before you started to get involved with Ronald, Tracy?
Absolutely nothing. The only thing that I've seen is the Amityville horror movie, and that was basically it.
Now, Tracy, I must ask, did the notoriety of the DeFeo family case bother you a little bit at first?
No, not really. I just, I really don't know that much about it, and I didn't know anything about any of this until I met my husband, and that's about it. The only thing I know is about the Amityville movies.
Tracy, tell us about Ron. What was he like when you first began to correspond with him? Was he standoffish at first, or was he willing to make a new friend?
No, he was really wanting to meet a new friend. He's very sweet, very caring. He lavishes gifts on me and my children, and he's just a very caring, wonderful man.
How did your relationship grow after you met him?
Well, I visit my husband once a month. I travel to New York, and it's usually about 7-8 days, and we talk on the phone maybe 4 or 5 times a week. We write every day.
Tracy, what do you do for a living, and when was the first time you met Ron after traveling from South Carolina to New York?
Well, I'm an in-home health nurse, and I traveled to New York. I think the first time I met Ronnie was about the end of 2002.
Now, you're embroiled in a lawsuit in progress. I realize you can't go into the actual specifics of the matter, but bring us up to speed on what prompted this legal action, Tracy.
Well, there is a pending lawsuit with the publishers and the writer of the book, The Night the DeFeos Died, and the book is, it has a lot of inaccuracies about it, so my husband is suing the publishers and the writer of this book. That's about all I can really comment on that.
Nightmare in Amityville. The Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family with Shadoe Steele continues.
We're live with Tracy DeFeo, the wife of Ronald DeFeo, who joins us from Westminster, South Carolina. Tracy, have you ever been married before?
Yes, I have.
What did your parents and friends say when you announced your plans to marry Ronald?
Well, they were concerned a little at first, but all that changed once they met my husband, and they've supported me, and that's all I can say on that.
Now, you spend one day a month at the Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Stormville, New York. What exactly can you do, and how long do you get with Ron, Tracy?
Well, you can visit 6 days a week, and I usually, like I said, I go maybe once a month, and my visits are like 7 or 8 days, and that's about it to that. We have the family reunion program, which is about every 3 months, and that's like 3 days. It's like maybe every 12 weeks.
Tracy, can you spend your time in private with Ron during your visit?
Unfortunately not. I can't do that. The security is very tight, but it has a relaxed atmosphere, and I wish I could spend my time in private with him, but that's not going to happen. Now,
Tracy, Ron has been at Greenhaven since 1975. What are the chances for his spending a real life with you in the near future?
Well, he's been at Greenhaven since 1994.
How do his chances look for parole in the future, Tracy?
Well, we're hoping he's going to get parole next year, and if he doesn't, I plan on moving to New York.
Any closing thoughts for our audience, Tracy?
Yes, my husband has been unjustly implicated and convicted for murdering 6 members of his family, when the fact is that neutral parties have investigated that there were at least 2 or 3 people involved in the murders. And this has sparked new interest in the ongoing Amityville saga, with several books and movie deals on the horizon. And this is why I've created my website, to give my husband a voice to tell his side of the story. And my website is called thenightexposed.net. It exposes Rick Osuna's book, The Night the DeFeos Died, as a fiction, not as a true story.
Tracy DeFeo, wife of Ronald DeFeo. Tracy, I can't thank you enough for being with us and for sharing some of your private details with the audience in a most interesting saga.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
My best to you and Ronald, Tracy.
Thank you, Shadoe.
Nightmare in Amityville. The Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family with Shadoe Steele.
Don't get mad. Get media. MadPod.
Nightmare in Amityville. The Ronald DeFeo story. Death in the Family with Shadoe Steele continues. In the weeks before the slayings, relations between Butch DeFeo and his father had reached the breaking point. Butch, apparently dissatisfied with the money he earned from his father, had devised a scheme to further defraud his family. 2 weeks before the slayings, Butch was sent on an errand by a staff member at the Buick dealership and given the responsibility of depositing $1,800 in cash and $20,000 in checks at the bank. Instead, Butch arranged to be robbed on his way by an acquaintance, with whom he later split the loot. Butch and another accomplice from the dealership departed for the bank at 12:30 p.m. They did not return for 2 hours, and when they did, reported they had been robbed at gunpoint while waiting at a red light. Ronald Sr. was waiting at the dealership and exploded with rage after hearing Butch's story, also berating the staff member who had sent him in the first place. The police were called and naturally asked to speak to Butch upon arriving. However, instead of engaging in a charade of cooperation, or at least devising a basic description of the fictional bandit, Butch became tense and irritable with the police. He became outright violent as they began to suspect he was lying, their questions now focusing on the 2 hours he was away. Wouldn't he have hastened back to the Buick dealership once he had been robbed of so much money? Where had he been during this time? In response to their questions, Butch began to curse at them, banging on the hood of a new car in his grandfather's lot to emphasize his rage. The police backed off for the moment. But Ronald Sr. had already come to his own conclusion about the motive for his son's behavior. On the Friday before the murders, Butch had been asked by the police to examine some mugshots and the possibility that he might be able to finger the thief. He initially agreed, but pulled out at the last minute. When Ronald Sr. heard of this, he confronted his son at work, demanding to know why he wouldn't cooperate with the police. "You've got the devil on your back," his father screamed at his son. Butch, not hesitating, retorted, "You fat prick, I'll kill you." He then ran to his car and sped off. The fight had not come to blows, but the final confrontation was imminent. The still shroud of night blanketed the village of Amityville in the early morning hours of Wednesday, November 14th, 1974. Stray house pets and the odd car were the only signs of life. His families and neighbors slumbered, but hatred and savagery were brewing beneath the seeming calm at 112 Ocean Boulevard. The entire DeFeo family had gone to bed, with the exception of Butch. As he sat in the quiet of his room, he knew what he wanted to do. What he in fact was going to do. His father and his family would be a nuisance to him no longer. Butch was the only member of the family with his own room. His violent disposition and the fact he was the eldest had afforded him this small luxury, as well as a private storage place for a number of weapons he collected and sometimes sold. On the night of the murders, Butch selected a .35 caliber Marlin rifle from his closet and set off stealthily but resolutely towards his parents' bedroom. 2:59 a.m. 1 minute before 3, Butch quietly pushed aside the door to their room and momentarily observed them as they slept, unaware of the horror at the foot of the four-post bed. Without hesitation, he raised the rifle to his shoulder and pulled the trigger. The first of 8 fatal shots he would fire that morning. The first shot ripped into his father's back, tearing through his kidney and exiting through his chest. He fired another round, again hitting his father in the back. This shot piercing the base of Ronald Sr.'s spine, lodging in his neck. By now, Louise DeFeo had roused herself and had barely a few seconds to react before her son began to fire upon her. Butch aimed the weapon at his mother as she lay prone on her bed, her arms waving frantically in the darkness. 2 shots were fired into her body. The bullet shattered her ribcage and collapsed her right lung. Both bodies now lay silently in the fresh pools of their own blood on the cool, percale bed linen. The DeFeo's dog Shaggy was tied up by the boathouse, barking violently in reaction to the brutality occurring in the house. His barking didn't distract Butch one bit. However, aware that he had completed the task he had set out to do, he now turned his attention to cleaning up and establishing an alibi to throw the inevitable police investigation off the trail. Butch calmly showered, trimmed his beard, and dressed in his jeans and work boots. He then collected his bloody clothing and the rifle, wrapped them up in a pillowcase, and headed out to his car. He threw the evidence into the trunk and took off into the pre-dawn hours before sunrise. Butch drove from the suburbs into Brooklyn, disposing of the pillowcase and its contents by casting them into a busy intersection storm drain. He then returned to Long Island and reported to work at his grandfather's Buick dealership at 6 a.m. It was business as usual.
MadPod's Amityville Horror Special. Check out all 10 episodes at amityville.podshow.com.